Okay, I think we can now start this panel on nuclear energy and sustainability in the European Union. My name is Marko Sidi, and I'm a senior researcher at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Just 2 words to introduce this panel. The intersection between nuclear energy and the European Union's green agenda is a topic of discussion throughout the European Union, and especially in some countries that are betting on nuclear energy. So the readiness to take the necessary measures to implement nuclear power differs in member states. And there are very different views in European societies in member states, which depend on political positioning, budgetary issues, and technological reservations. So this conversation will investigate, will examine these discussions from the perspective of well, different member states or different experts for sure. And we will also discuss how nuclear power may or may not tie to the EU's, contribute to the EU's green objectives. So we have a few experts, excellent speakers with us today, and I will introduce them one by one briefly as I hand over the floor to them. Let me start with Edmunds Cepuritis, who is chair of the European Affairs Committee at the Parliament of Latvia. And he is also a founder and former co-chair of the political party Progressives. Edmunds holds an MSc in environmental science from the University of Latvia. So Edmunds, please, the floor is yours for your introductory remarks.
Well, thank you very much. I was in some sense maybe hoping that the more technical experts would come in first, and then I could react how that translates in politics. But of course, I can also do the opposite. And I mean, I think a good start is that nuclear energy is one of those topics where the technical often gets sort of entangled with political, and not always in a very, very positive ways. In the sense that most technologies are not political intrinsically. There's the questions that are raised and the issues that then can be solved politically. So, for example, from my side, I come from green political families, also social democratic, as was mentioned, and there traditionally there has been sort of skepticism towards the nuclear energy. And I think my position contrasts with that a little bit, because I, for example, see the extending the life cycles of the nuclear reactors as one of the cheapest, one of the easiest options to achieve the climate goals. And I fully respect the sort of contributions that nuclear sector can give in order to achieve the climate goals and generally the energy security. But at the same time, when I have to bring those questions to the Baltic context, where there, with some exception in Lithuania, there isn't actually a tradition and industry related to nuclear energy, I see that the same technology can become very, very difficult to implement, to sort of develop the projects that would replace the fossil fuel resources better than the alternatives of renewable energy sources. And I think there's always that tendency to look at each of the situation through that political lens, through the sort of familiar narratives. And for me, I think that is very much dependent on the sort of the role of the nuclear power is very much dependent on the sort of situation that we are talking about. Just looking at some of the possible questions and the characteristics, I think I hope to see some of the new insights also from the other experts in this panel. But I think the main characteristics of nuclear energy projects is their long time spans, large capital investments needed, and of course, then there are the positives that with technologies, if you wish, so you can have a flexible output of electricity. You have that reliability, you have that independence of basically weather and then other natural flows of energy. And as I was saying, when you take that to context that I'm most familiar with the Baltic countries, and they aim to sort of achieve energy security in the sort of more in a strip of land with more limited energy demand, then you're basically faced with a question that you're putting a lot of your investment in just a single basket for a lot of years. And for me as a politician, that comes as one of the obstacles that where I start to see that the alternatives become more reasonable to achieve, because achieving the political stability for still controversial in a society projects, which I think every energy project now is a bit controversial, at least once you have to work with the local communities, but definitely the nuclear energy is one of those. And once you can't put the guarantees that you're going to have the public support, that you're eventually going to finish this project, that you're eventually going to achieve these benefits of all the investment, then I think for smaller energy demand regions, that becomes a risk a bit too large to take. But at the same time, as I want to come back with both extending the life of the nuclear reactors and also, of course, developing new projects in the places where you have a lot more of the industry in place. I think that's a position where that political support is much easier to get, to retain, and also then that translates into being a very reasonable sort of part of the general energy mix to achieve our climate goals. And for me, that is one of those complicated questions where it's hard for politicians to frame a very specific policy, because for me, I would have to say to the answer, do you support nuclear energy? I would have to give a very long answer, which probably wouldn't fit in the 30-second segment in any sort of political debate, because I'm probably talking for far more than that now. And these are the sort of my perspectives, and I'm very interested if the challenges that I put out, that I just face as a politician, if I would wanted to put my weight on one side or the other, whether some of these can be challenged by the sort of more detailed aspects of nuclear energy, whether maybe some of these optimisms I have shared maybe also need to be criticized a bit more from the other panelists. I'm very interested to also be not just only a participant, but also a listener to that.
Thank you very much, Edmund, for these initial remarks. Let me just now hand over the floor to our second speaker, who is Alexander Arabčić, who is president and co-creator of the Academy of Polish Careers, a project that was initiated at the Warsaw School of Economics. And he is also one of the initiators of the Polish Digital Sovereignty Charter and the Smart Youth Future Education Initiative. Alexander has an MBA in Business and Security Management from the Academy of Social Sciences in Łódź, and he works on several topics, most notably Polish and EU energy security. Recently he also started in 2022 as policy advisor at Cygnus, so a leading Polish company in the deep tech sector in the field of international cooperation and security. So Alexander, the floor is yours for initial remarks.
Thank you, Marco. I hope that because I'm now on truly also on a sustainable education project in Polish mountains, and that's why it can be a little, I'm in the garden. We had today a project with young people from Latvia, from Czech Republic, and also from Poland. Okay, when you started to read my bio, it's also there's a connection between energy and security. We in Poland, as a country which now is on the border with the countries at war, we started to think that we not started to think, but we were talking that energy means security, and for us in Poland, also energy security means nuclear power plants, because if you want to improve also your not only society or to live, but if you want to have your industry to go ahead and that the industry is sustainable, the nuclear energy and nuclear power plants, also the newest technology, the SMR, which are projected, are them better, the most secure, and are good for also not only for climate but also from industry. That's the most important thing. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
And also in Poland, probably when you see some polls in Poland, we have about 90% approval for nuclear energy in Poland. But it's quite important to say that at the moment we don't have our own nuclear power plants. We started to build 2 power plants, and we are starting projects with the American companies to build the small mobile nuclear power plants, SMRs.
Okay, excellent. Yes, we can still hear you. Let me jump in right away, as maybe we still have a few minutes. What is the timeline for the projects in Poland? If I remember correctly, there are both some large plants, like standard nuclear power plants that are envisioned and planned, and then there are plans for the construction of small modular reactors, SMRs. Can you give us any dates for these projects?
It's told that we had to have those big power plants in 2035, and at the moment everything is going with the plan. There was a moment that we thought that there may be some problems because of the change of government, but as I told before, there is quite big there is agreement across division between the parties in Poland to build, because it's a part of our security at the moment. 2035, probably because it's this SMRs, they are not there. This is new technology, probably quite the same. But Poland is also the country which probably in future will have plenty of them.
Thank you, Alexander, and I will come back to this issue and to the topic of the timeline maybe a bit later. Also, maybe drawing on the recent Finnish experience. But before we do that, let me move on. And we now hear introductory remarks from Mike Christiansen, who has an MSc in Applied Economics and Finance, 20 years of experience in investment banking, private equity, and investment management. Mike is a co-founder of 2 startups within the financial sectors, and he now works for Copenhagen Atomics. So Mike, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And yes, I work as a CFO for Copenhagen Atomics, and I've been doing that for 2.5 years now. Copenhagen Atomics is a Danish-based company that is working on developing a molten salt reactor, which is fueled by thorium and nuclear waste. It is designed for mass manufacturing and rapid scalability. So everything we do, everything we design, it has to be scalable, it has to be able to be mass manufactured on an assembly line. And that will allow us to produce 1 reactor every day when we reach full scalability. 1 reactor fits in a 40-foot shipping container. Again, with the same purpose. Even though you can mass manufacture it on an assembly line, if you cannot distribute it using normal logistic systems, your scalability is not achieved. So our reactor can be transported using normal trucks, ships, or railroads. It produces 100 megawatts of thermal energy, and it can be, I mean, you can imagine it as Lego bricks, right? I'm from Denmark, so we think in Lego bricks. So you can put 4 of them together, or you could put 100 of them together, attaining whatever level of output you want. We've been doing this for almost 10 years now. It was founded in 2012, actually, or the idea was founded in 2012. And our approach to developing this technology is very much focused on building and testing the technology live. So of course we do a lot of computer simulations, we do a lot of CAD drawings, but as soon as we have something that works on a computer, we go to our factory, we build it, and we test it live. That means that we have more test hours on these molten salt reactors than any other company in the world. And even combining all the others, we still have more test time. We have 2 test reactors in Copenhagen. Both of them are, of course, not allowed to create fission, so we cannot start them correctly, but we can circulate the salts and we can test pumps, valves, sensors. We can test all the software here. So what we are aiming at now, or our next big step, is to take a test reactor. It will actually be a 3rd test reactor. Take it to a country where nuclear fission is allowed, and we hope to do that by 2026, where our first test reactor will hopefully go live. And from there on, it's mass manufacturing and final approval, and hopefully we can have a commercial reactor ready by 2028.
Right. Thank you very much, Mike, for your introductory remarks. And now we'll hear from our 4th speaker following our program today, who is Annika Hedberg. Annika is a sustainability and green transition professional and an expert on related EU policies and developments. She is currently located in Washington, D.C., where she focuses on these issues from a transatlantic perspective. However, Annika also has a tie to Europe. She's a senior advisor on climate and sustainability at the European Policy Center, EPC, as you know, an independent think tank based in Brussels, where she worked for the last 14 years. She was previously working at the Finnish Business and Policy Forum EVA and at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland. Please, Annika, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to join this discussion. Perhaps I'll be happy to take a bit of a step back and look at the big picture, because that's where very much where I tend to focus my attention on. And it's clear when we're looking at the past years, since Russia started its war in Ukraine, Europe has seen a serious rethink of how we produce and consume energy. And how this has translated into reality is that we've seen clean energy transition with a great focus on energy efficiency and renewables as a very much a focus as a way to achieve secure, sustainable and affordable European energy supply. And it's recognized that cutting use of Russian fossil fuels is also central to cutting our financial support for the Russian war machine. And as a result, in the past years, the EU has very much responded by putting forward numerous initiatives and proposals to accelerate the clean energy transition. And as said, energy savings, energy efficiency have been very much a focus. We've seen numerous efforts to encourage these. We've seen several proposals, measures to accelerate rollout of renewable energy sources, which has included higher targets for the share of renewables in the energy mix, in the EU's energy mix, efforts to streamline and simplify national permitting procedures, speed up deployment of heat pumps, reform internal electricity market, the list goes on. Now, when it comes to nuclear, the EU's role has always been limited, basically to ensuring nuclear safety. And also today, the EU continues to stress that it is really up to member states themselves to decide what energy sources they use, and what is the role of nuclear. And the reality on the ground is on what is the role for nuclear in the clean energy transition. But when we're looking at what's the state of play, so nuclear power generated about 1/5 of the EU's electricity in 2022. We have 13 EU countries that have operational nuclear plants. And while Germany has now closed its nuclear plants, there we do see renewed, even growing interest in nuclear in number of member states. Italy provides a very interesting example, as it is redebating the issue again. And there are currently EU-level discussions and developments that show enhanced interest in nuclear as part of the clean energy transition and enhancing European energy security. And I'll just list some examples of these. This may be a bit technical, but it's worth to recognize that these themselves provide a signal about the direction of travel. So we are talking about labeling nuclear as a green energy source under EU taxonomy for sustainable activities, which can incentivize investments in the sector. There's acceptance that some hydrogen produced in nuclear-based energy systems can count towards EU renewable energy goals. Now, labeling nuclear as a strategic technology for EU's decarbonization under the Net Zero Industry Act again would allow prioritization for nuclear under public procurement. And as a fourth example, European Commission is looking for ways to facilitate safe development of small modular reactors, for example, via European Industrial Alliance on SMRs. So the question remains, what kind of concrete projects and funding will we see in reality? But these examples, what I just listed here, these are important signals that nuclear is very much seen as part of the future energy package. Now, going forward, there certainly are numerous considerations across member states as well as on the EU level, but I'll just pick on a few or three to indicate what I think should be part of the discussion. First of all, we need collaboration across the EU if we are to enhance our energy security and deliver on the clean energy transition. And for this, we need a functioning electricity market. We need to collaborate on research and innovation. And while national energy mixes remain a national competence on the paper, I would like to see that member states start recognizing their responsibility and interest as part of the EU to ensure that any national measures they take actually promote rather than hinder EU-wide climate action and energy security. Unfortunately, it is examples like German Energiewende that increased Germany's thirst for gas from Russia, with now known impacts for the whole of Europe, and which led to closing its nuclear power plants at a time when the EU was going through one of its biggest energy crises. It is examples like these that should act as a warning for us how not to do things. The EU is stronger, it is more effective than the sum of its parts, but only if it works together in addressing joint challenges. As a second consideration, when it comes to nuclear, this is not a silver bullet for solving our challenges. Nuclear fission remains expensive. It is a high-risk technology. We've seen the investment challenges with traditional nuclear plants, the delays, the cost overruns. And while there is great interest now in SMRs, we need to be careful with how these will be regulated. And while scientists in the US have carried out now a successful nuclear fusion reaction, it is still a long path to making this commercially viable. So big question marks do remain. And as a point, I would just add that the EU's quest for clean energy and energy security cannot lead to replacing old dependency with new ones. We've learned what it means when you put all eggs in one basket, Russia, and don't diversify gas suppliers and routes. Now there's a lot of discussion about the need to ensure access to the critical materials we need for the renewables and batteries to achieve clean energy transition. And the same rhetoric, the same thinking needs to apply also to nuclear. as long as we remain dependent on technologies and fuel from Russia, we have not achieved our objective, and we need to take this very seriously. So I'll finish there, and very happy to respond to any questions there may be. Thanks.
Thank you very much for these excellent remarks to all of you, and Annika also for outlining some of the issues concerning nuclear energy. So I would say that all the contributions so far are quite positive about nuclear power. So let me try to challenge you a little bit by adding something on the table. So the Finnish case was already mentioned. Now, Finland inaugurated last year the first EPR, so the European pressurized reactor in Europe, at Olkiluoto. Now, the project was 14 years late. It was planned to be commissioned in 2009, and it started operation in 2023. That means that for 14 years, Finland had to find electricity from alternative sources. And it was only by accident, by coincidence, that operation started shortly after the Russian attack on, or let's say about a year after the Russian attack on Ukraine. So what I'm hinting at is that the traditional large nuclear power plants seem to be problematic in terms of timeline, costs, and this is also about European technology. Besides the reactor in Finland, the only EPR that's operational is in China. Then we have 2 projects in France and the UK, and those are also behind schedule. So my question to you is, first question to you is, can we actually trust traditional nuclear power plants, large plants, also considering how dependent electricity systems become on these plants? And then second question, and I will hand the floor over to all of you, those who want to comment. What about small modular reactors? They are highlighted as a simpler, technically a simpler solution. However, critics highlight that they also involve many of the issues that large reactors have. For example, disposal of nuclear waste. Risks in terms of critical infrastructure, just to mention a few. So how would you respond to this criticism of large and small nuclear power plants? I don't know if anyone would like to start. Of course, there's no need to raise hands. So we can just open your mics, and I see Alexander wants to contribute. So please.
Yes, because I would like to start with the problem connected with nuclear power plants. We have very good example because yesterday there was a kind of attack on the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant in Ukraine. And we can see in Ukraine that it's quite easy to, I'm not talking about destroying the power plant, but the Russian, when they have claimed the power plant, they immediately have changed the way with giving energy, not to the Ukrainian country and citizen, but to Russian territories, which are only for, we think that for some times, but it was, I don't know, in a week. And Ukraine lost the power plant, not by destroying, but claiming it by military. And this is one of the things we can see that, for example, the renewable energy, solar or wind power plants, they are better in military conflict.
Thank you, Alexander. Yes, so the diffusion of renewable energy production is an advantage in this case, because we are less dependent on one single production facility, to put it simply. Mike, would you like to?
Yeah, I have a few comments because I think I do not disagree that some of the power plants currently trying to go online has been way too long and has been way too expensive to bring them online. And I think I think the nuclear industry has sort of put themselves in a difficult position because they want to do, or at least when you're looking at traditional light water reactor technology, they're just making them bigger and more complicated, and instead of kind of rethinking what nuclear power can be. And this is what the new technologies are kind of addressing, because it does not need to be so large and so complex to build. Because when you look at Hinkley Point C, for example, in the UK, I mean, it's a huge construction site, and it, of course, it's much more complicated to produce something on site instead of looking at a car manufacturing site where everything is produced on an assembly line. It makes it so much more effective. And this is kind of what's also addressing the cost, because what makes these things so expensive is, of course, when it takes 14 or 18 years to produce something, the capital cost just becomes immense. And this is what of these new technologies kind of addresses. If you can do this on an assembly line and ship things to the site and just turn it on more or less, then you're sort of addressing at least the cost issue and the scalability issue. What we and other of our colleagues are also addressing is the waste issue, and I know this is at least the public debate, a huge issue, and yeah, obviously I'm I'm biased here, but I actually think it's also being blown out of proportions a little bit. But nevertheless, these new technologies, I mean, the waste is much smaller. It needs to be stored for much shorter amount of time, because the burn up, what makes the traditional light water reactor waste, it takes 100,000 years before it can be circulated back to nature. It's actually because it contains a lot of energy still. There's lots of plutonium and other isotopes left in the fuel. But new technologies, I mean, we have 100% burn up. So what comes out of our reactor is what's called fission products, and they are radioactive. So they're not to be stored in a kindergarten, but they can be stored above ground, and we have been storing nuclear waste for centuries, and there has been minimal issues around it. So I think many of these stigmas can actually be addressed, but it takes will and it takes money to do so.
Right. Thank you for this contribution. Let me add two other points, and maybe Edmunds and Annika can address the questions together or select the ones they prefer to answer. So there are the issues that we have discussed. I think I can add another consideration. It seems to me that in the West, the nuclear sector, I mean, large nuclear power plants thrived or were more successful in the projects when energy markets were less liberalized. So it was more of a monopolistic system where states absorbed the risk. And now with more liberalized markets, with growing competition also from other energy sources, most notably renewables, it is more difficult to return to that model. And on top of that, we have statist models like Russia, China, that perhaps also because they keep that type of model with state absorbing the risk, they are more successful in the nuclear sector. So we have Russia's Rosatom, which is the largest exporter of reactors. So what is the possible solution? I mean, should the West even try to compete when it comes to large plants, or is it actually better to focus on other energy sources that might decrease the significance also worldwide of nuclear? And then connected to this separate issue that Annika already touched upon, what are the political and security of supply risks in the nuclear sector? And now I can identify at least three layers. So one, dependencies for the import of natural uranium. We saw the coup d'etat in Niger last summer, for example, with France that was getting a lot of uranium from Niger. Secondly, enriched uranium and nuclear fuel, with Russia being a leader in this sector. And third, what we were talking about a moment ago, dependence on actually full technology, so importing a whole reactor and related services to a country. So please, Annika, if you want to comment on this from, and Edmunds, of course, from any perspective, political, security, the floor is yours.
Sure. Maybe first of all, to talk about the role of the state. I think that when it comes to any energy source, I think we need to be very transparent about the costs and incorporate the lifetime costs of these technologies in the considerations, because certainly I think that by looking into, and the reality remains, is the EU remains a massive subsidizer of fossil fuels still today, although we know all the costs that come with this dependency. So I think we need to be very, very transparent. The same does apply to nuclear. We need to be transparent about the costs, the lifetime costs of these technologies. And in this comparison, renewables come out as a very competitive and attractive solution, which is why also it itself should send a very clear signal to any investors that these are the technologies that we do want to invest in, and that ultimately, if we internalize the external costs, this is the most viable and interesting solution in many comparisons. But we do recognize as well, and I think we need to recognize that if we are to have energy security, we do need to diversify our energy sources. Across the EU, it's recognized that nuclear can play an important part in this. Previously, you posed a question about the traditional versus the new technologies, the SMRs. And I do think that the SMRs, there is a lot of interest in this technology at the moment for the fact that it is more cost efficient, it is easier to deploy. The costs are coming down. You will not have to wait as long as what you have with the traditional power plants. And in a time when the EU is desperately looking for domestic energy sources, these kind of technologies do become an interesting option in the full package. Now, whether, and I guess kind of on the dependencies, like I said myself, is that this is a serious issue we do need to address and continue to address if we are keen on keeping nuclear as part of the package. And we're not having enough discussion about our dependence on Russian technologies and fuel when it comes to energy. And thus, we do need these new kind of ideas on how we can use, for example, nuclear waste to fuel the plants. It is important for us to move forward. When it comes to the overall question for whether EU or Europe or different member states should be looking into other solutions, as you can hear from my comments, I do think that nuclear is part of the package. At the same time, I see that it's much more commercially perhaps viable and for other reasons as well, to look into renewables. But US does provide a very interesting case study in this regard. The US is, first of all, obviously, the environment in the US is very much more open to nuclear. You don't have the same kind of discussions on nuclear in the US as what you have in Europe. The division on the role of nuclear in the energy mix is not as prevalent here as it is in Europe. And at the same time, you really see nuclear being major part of any discussions on clean energy transition. Investments are going into nuclear, and this is a consideration for Europe, that if we are serious about clean energy transition, if we do need clean, cheap, clean, affordable energy in the future, if nuclear is considered to be part of that package, we also need to create that market and the incentives for the investments to go into this sector and to continue to improve this sector, be it SMRs, be it obviously fusion, really kind of interesting potential for us. And the US is doing this. It is investing heavily in nuclear. It's seeing potential with this technology. And this is a consideration also for EU from industrial competitiveness perspective, that do we want to be part of this competition and try to see what we can do with nuclear. And in this case, if we are serious about it, then we do need to invest in it and invest in new technologies and the new wave of nuclear.
Thank you very much, Annika. I have just a very quick follow-up question. So the US is investing on nuclear, like with the Inflation Reduction Act, they're investing a lot in renewable energy. At the same time, sticking to the nuclear industry, can we also say that the US nuclear industry fell behind for some of the same reasons that we see in Europe? Westinghouse, even, well, let's say going in pre-bankruptcy mode a few years ago. So let's say that things might be clearer than in Europe, but they're not so rosy either. Please correct me if I'm mistaken on this.
Certainly, I think that for the nuclear industry in the West in general, it really has been rough times. But there is this revival for nuclear. It's very visible in the US at the moment. And I do find that the discussion is already further ahead. And it has, when you talk to industry in Europe, they are actually extremely worried. The nuclear industry in Europe, they're extremely worried about this competition, that there's no way how European nuclear industry will be able to compete with the subsidies and support that the American counterparts are getting at the moment. So it is a reality that the competition is on, and if EU doesn't make up its mind, and if the EU member states do not make up their mind on what the role for nuclear is in the energy mix, there's a huge risk that we will certainly lose. But hopefully then at least we will have the Americans to provide for us, not the Russians.
Okay, thank you very much, Annika. Edmunds, I turn to you if you want to address some of these issues, but I also add one more point, which comes from the audience. So we are receiving several questions, and one of the questions is, wouldn't there be some fear in society that would block these projects? Actually, the question says risky projects. What do you think?
Well, definitely. And first, let me touch a bit on that aspect, which was mentioned, I think, by several of the colleagues here, that definitely the sort of energy policy is intertwined with the industrial policy and sort of decisions that are made at the EU or at national level on where do we want to take that industry, where energy production is definitely going to be one of those that will probably be focused on. And in that area where industrial policy is more about making choices, then it's easier to contrast these. And I think many of the previous comments actually elaborate what these choices are. So you have the sort of, let's say it will be a common EU fund, maybe something along the next generation EU for the energy security and defense or something like that, which increase the sort of funding. Let's just dream a bit that there's going to be such a fund. So where would you, what would be a viable political project to sort of base that very large, mobilization of the political capital? Whether that would be, rollout of renewables, rollout of flexible energy demand solutions, the sort of improving the grids and sort of these directions that EU and other countries have been moving on already, or whether these would be sort of support for the innovative nuclear solutions or large-scale nuclear reactions to produce them at a scale at a wide angle. And I think there you can already start to feel that tension with the second option, that there's so many technical and political uncertainties and risks there, that if you would want to make a very, very large political project, you would bet more on the first option, just because it's safer, it's easier to explain, it doesn't have that traditional political sort of politicization basically of technology that nuclear energy projects are facing. So just from coming from a bit of the the real politics angle, it's far more likely that the majority of these industrial energy intertwined policy decisions will go towards the alternatives where the nuclears definitely are looking strong. They have good public image with decreasing prices, which is always, very optimistic side for a lot of people, and therefore people would be more willing to support these policies. Therefore, politicians would be more likely to put this bet on that basket. And I think that there are probably other analysts that would look at it differently, but I think for me that looks the same way. I think in that context, it's very important to not forget the nuclear energy. And I think even within that context, there are multiple cases where you can find a role that is maybe not as, not putting as much political capital on the sort of future projections, but basically, putting the amount of investments in innovation that is needed, developing let's say the previous generation nuclear plants, the more large scale ones where that is viable, and also of course extending the lives of the nuclear plants where that makes sense, or at least where the alternatives look far worse. So I think that is the more realistic take. I don't see a sort of nuclear renaissance at the large scale where they would overtake renewables in the sort of political priorities. But I don't think that means that there's not, very important questions to sort of fight for, to sort of mobilize people if the alternatives is the energy dependencies, if the alternatives are missing out on the climate targets and fueling the climate crisis. So that is a very interesting question that the next cycle of EU institutions will probably have to square. And of course, then some countries which have a lot of politicization on these issues, that politicize the technologies, they won't make these discussions easier. But the EU politics always deals with difficult dilemmas and tries to reach some sort of best case scenarios. I hope that is the one that we will probably see here as well.
Thank you very much. And yes, we can say that also the projections of the International Atomic Energy Agency do not see like a large increase in generation from nuclear on a global scale. Actually, they foresee a rather stable around 9-10%, if I remember correctly. But still, especially if we look beyond Europe, by the way, there are many projects, especially in countries where energy consumption is increasing. Looking at the questions from the audience, there are two questions that somehow concern the residential sector, nuclear energy and how to integrate it in the residential sector. I can read one that probably summarizes very well what people are asking. So what are some examples of innovative technologies or design approaches that integrate nuclear energy into sustainable homes while addressing environmental and safety concerns? So quite specific question. If any of you would like to comment right away, if you need a moment, I'm looking at Mike. I was expecting a reaction. So if you want to say something right away, please do so.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a good question. I think one of the benefits of nuclear energy, which is kind of a drawback in this respect, is nuclear energy is an extreme dense form of energy. So with very, very little material, you can create a lot of energy. And that goes back to I don't think nuclear can be integrated in a residential area because it's simply way too much energy for any residential. I mean, one of our reactors, which fits a 40-foot shipping container, delivers just as much energy as 8 big wind turbines, right? So it's a very dense energy form, and it will simply be way too expensive to place one of those and then just to power up a few light bulbs and an iPad. Nuclear energy is designed by physics to be used for large energy consumption. So in huge industrial complexes, or in powering the grid from outside a city. Or I mean, we focus a lot on this power to X, if you like, or the synthetic fuels, because these are also massive energy consumers. And this what makes sense, because then we can install 100 reactors somewhere remotely, and then they just run 24/7, 365 days a year, just producing ammonia or hydrogen or whatever it's needed. This is what nuclear energy can do, and then renewables and other less than energy forms are much more suitable, I think, for residential use or for private consumption.
Thank you very much. Now, if anyone wants to come in on this, please do so. But in the meantime, let me pick another question that is quite interesting here. From the audience, and the question is, how do EU member states differ in their reliance on nuclear energy, and what factors influence their respective approaches to nuclear power generation? So it's a huge question. We can think of perhaps the French and the German case. They are quite different. Let me just add a small note here. Germany is often criticized for its decision of shutting down nuclear power plants. Now, I don't want to judge that decision myself, but just to put into context, that decision was taken after the Fukushima accident in 2011, when public opinion turned against nuclear in Germany. And Germany bet, of course, on gas, and a lot of that gas, 2021, about 50% came from Russia. At the same time, some rebuff this criticism by saying that actually in the summer of 2022, Germany was selling electricity to France, while French nuclear reactors were offline due to maintenance, due to lack of cold water in the summer to cool down reactors. So this is just to frame a bit maybe the question. But so basically, what is being asked is how do EU members differ, and what are the motivating factors for these different approaches? Now, we heard that from Alexander a moment ago that in Poland, public opinion is actually quite positive about the new nuclear power plants. So what about other countries? Would you like to comment on this? And of course, Alexander, if you want to expand, you're most welcome. So I saw, Annika, you want to say something?
Maybe I can just start by just saying that obviously there's long division on this issue across the EU member states, and it does come down to history, past experiences. If we take Italy, Lithuania, now Germany, that have made decisions to decommission their nuclear power plants. There have been the national experiences, the national discussions that have led to these decisions. And then at the same time, I do see a role also for the political parties in this. It's very interesting that, for example, in Germany, the role that Greens have over the decades played in being very much against nuclear. But then again, now in Finland, the Green Party has said that they see nuclear as being part of the clean energy transition package. So it is very interesting also how different parties in different national contexts are adjusting to the national circumstances, as well as seeing what role they're seeing for the technology on the basis of the experiences within the country and how they see that people will react. I don't see these differences going to disappear anytime soon. But like I said in my introductory remarks, it is quite interesting to look at the EU level discussions at the moment. It's often being said that energy sources and what energy sources countries use is a national competence, and this has especially been made as a reference to nuclear. But then at the same time, when we're looking at the different initiatives, discussions, developments that are taking place at the moment, you could see this as being more of a green light for nuclear, and these efforts to try to actually encourage or help countries that are willing and interested to use nuclear to actually do so. It is a signal that the EU does recognize that we need to have and try to utilize the domestic resources that we have, and nuclear can be part of that package for those countries that are interested in it. So certainly I would say that's kind of perhaps the environment is more favorable to nuclear today than it has been in a very, very long time.
Thank you very much.
I don't know the vote in Germany, but as far as I remember, the public opinion changed its view on nuclear energy in last year, because the voters, but not only green voters, but the main parties voters are in favor of nuclear energy. I hope in next Bundestag there will be a bigger approval, and they will turn on back some nuclear power plants, because Germany is quite important nowadays in building our European industry. And without nuclear power plants, there would be no competition in the world.
Would you like to add something, Edmunds? Perhaps also bringing to us a Baltic perspective. I mean, of course, Baltic Sea, but Baltic states in particular, as after all, we are hosted by Latvian Institute of International Affairs. So we are very much keen on hearing this perspective alongside all the others.
Well, I'm not quite sure of the polling, although I think there has been some on Latvian society's perception of nuclear energy. It definitely wasn't one-sided in either of the ways. I think it showed quite some differences, and if I look from political perspective, it showed a lot of potential for creating political cleavages and building political capital on either side, was the sort of pro-nuclear energy side and then anti-nuclear energy side. And well, I think here we haven't had that materialized yet in any ways. I don't think that the sort of divisions on energy sources have been quite so prominent among the political spectrum. And I think the same stands for the other Baltic countries. Maybe there are some political forces that put pro-nuclear energy as more of their flagship proposals, but I don't think it has been that relevant in political discussions. But then, of course, as I mentioned, in the Baltic context, I think there have been now discussions about the possibility of creating a joint large-scale nuclear reactor in the Baltic countries, but frankly, for me, I don't think that the conditions are there to put the sort of initiative up for the level of public discussion so that it would become a prominent issue. And in any of the case, I think such very large-scale projects, to even conceptualize them, I don't see that happening in the nearest future. So for our region, I would say our most impactful aspects are how do we participate in EU decision making, whether we put our pro or anti-nuclear decisions in the EU decision making process in one way or another. And I think in most of these cases we have been quite neutral about either what were the latest developments, both the taxonomy or some other aspects. We haven't taken very strong positions either way. So basically, we have shown that it's not a very active political debate by allowing the other countries with more heated opinions to have that debate. But I just maybe wanted to put that little side, which was mentioned there about the risks in the population. I think it's a very sort of facile subject. I think very quickly you can create a very, anti-establishment political campaign based on the sort of anti-nuclear positions. And I think a lot of the political forces are aware of that, and that of course influences any sort of large-scale political initiatives which you don't want to put under such risks.
Thank you very much, Edmunds. And let me say that, so we had different opinions. We stated that there are different views in EU member states on nuclear energy. And often when such different views exist, there tends to be silence at European level. Now, this year, we are in a year of European elections. My personal opinion is that if there was a discussion also before the elections on such important topics like the one we discussed today, this could perhaps alleviate some of the national differences, or at least it would create a common European discursive space. So this would be my wish. But now we are at the end of our allotted time of 1 hour. So I must end this session here. But before I do that, let me thank all of you for your contributions. It was a very interesting and stimulating hour for me, and I believe also for the audience. I also thank the audience for joining us. And I hope to see you all in the future so that we can continue these discussions. So have a nice evening. The panel is now closed.